But I got to tell you, this is not easy for me to put on. And the first thing I do when I put it on is you start laughing at me. This does not get us off to a good start. I suffer from, do you know what PTSD is? Post-traumatic stress disorder. Has anyone ever seen me wear this white coat? No. Well, there's a reason for that. When I was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old, my grandmother took me to the market, and there was this guy in a white coat, like this. And he's standing there behind the counter, and he's got a chicken. And she says she wants a chicken. As he takes the chicken, he chops the head off, and the blood is all over the place, and he wipes it on his coat. And I said, "What is that man?" She said, "He's a butcher." And ever since then, a white coat for me. But I see people in the hospital, and you seem to be taking them seriously, and I thought this is an important topic, so I was going to wear the white coat. But I can see that that was a failure. I'm going to try it as long as I can. Now, this whole business about aging is a tricky concept, and I think the most common question that people ask me when they're paying good money, as opposed to you folks, is, am I aging? Now, there was our town moderator here for many years, Lou Maxfield, often used to start the town meeting with a little story in order to put things on a lighthearted note. And it was often a story about the farmer and the preacher, which I should mention in my one plug will be the title of my next book, coming out in January, Chelsea Green Press in White River Junction. And one of my favorite stories of that was a very simple one. The farmer says to the preacher says to the farmer, "How's your wife?" And the farmer says to the preacher, "Relative to what?" So I started by asking my 3-year-old grandson, "What's an old person?" And he said, "Ella." Ella is his 10-year-old cousin. So I asked Ella, "Who's old?" She said, "Jennifer is old. Jennifer is her 18-year-old babysitter." I asked Jennifer. She said, "Oh, my parents are old." Jennifer's 18. You can guess the age of her parents. Anyway, you get the picture. And then there was Vida Edmonds. I don't know if anybody here remembers Vida Edmonds. Yeah. Vida Edmonds was 102 or 103, I think, when she finally stopped being old. And she came into the hospital once. Her joints ached. She couldn't see. She was in terrible pain. Her heart wasn't doing very well. Her kidneys had stopped working. She was miserable sick. And I was trying to make her feel better. You know, the doctors used to do that. And I said, "There, Mrs. Edmonds, I understand." And she looks at me, she says, "Sonny?" She called me Sonny, not because of my disposition. She says, "You don't have a clue how I feel. If I could feel the way I was when I was 90, I'd be happy." So this whole business of aging is a relative concept. I mean, what we know for a fact is that you start aging from the time the sperm and the egg get together until you stop doing everything altogether. And what people really want to know is, am I old? Or more importantly, what we want to know is, how can I pretend that I'm not old? Many of you may know that there's been a history of the search for eternal youth. It started back in Greek times with a philosopher named Herodotus, who was convinced that there was a fountain of youth in Ethiopia. Alexander the Great, it'll be a very brief history lesson, I promise. Alexander the Great thought it was the Greek islands, which is probably why Mediterranean cruises are so popular. And then most of us remember from grade school, let's say, Ponce de Leon. There's a bit of misunderstanding about him, which has led to a major exodus of people from this part of the country. And that is that people thought that he was looking for the fountain of youth in Florida. But in fact, it was the Bahamas, the Bimini Islands, that he was looking for. There also is the Peter Pan principle, Never Never Land, the idea being that if you don't grow up, you don't grow old. One of my favorite approaches to this problem. And then there has been a considerable amount of research studying people who live in the Caucasus, the mountains in southern Russia. There's a tribe there called the Abkhazes, many of whom live to be 100 and 110 years old and look and act half their age. So there's been a lot of research into that. They find that these people have a very healthy diet, lots of grains and all kinds of stuff, and basically they avoid anything that tastes good. They work hard until they die, and they have a great deal of respect for their elders. It turns out that elders there, who begin at around age 80 or 90, are people whom are contacted on a regular basis by other members of the community. When they looked at younger people in this community, they found that almost all of them, over 80%, said they had sought advice from an elder within the past week. Obviously, that's not something that we can do here. So there was a considerable amount of interest in what we could do to emulate the lifestyle of these people. I should mention that the story about the land where they live is that when God was giving out property to the various peoples of the world, the Abkhazes were entertaining company. And in that society, it's very impolite to leave before your company leaves. And so they got what was left over at the end, which was a large pile of rocks and a large mountain. Whether or not that has anything to do with their longevity is also unclear. It turns out that the predominant reason that these people seem to live so long is that it's been genetically predetermined. They have what's called a single nucleotide polymorphism, which I probably knew what it meant once, but at least I know how to pronounce it. And they're predetermined to live a long period of time. So that probably the most important thing you could really do if you want to live a long period of time, it's too late to do, and that is mate with an Abkhazi. There's been quite a bit of research, as I'm sure you all know, into other things that we could do to live long and healthy lives. Particularly, there's a lot of talk about something called phenols. It's in blueberries, it's in red wine, it's in pomegranates. I saw in the Burlington Free Press, either yesterday or the day before, I don't know if it got in the Valley News, that you can now get this substance in maple syrup, but only in Canadian maple syrup. Have you heard about this? Quebec Hall. I'm actually not making this up, and it's as close to being serious as I will be. That the argument is that it can't be proved that it's in Vermont maple syrup because we don't have enough money to support the research to prove that this substance exists in Canadian maple syrup. So that if you want to live a healthy life with maple syrup, you're probably going to have to switch to Canadian maple syrup. There is a pill that has been marketed as being the longevity pill. And in fact, if you give this pill to mice, they live twice as long. Also, worms live a lot longer. And in fact, we use this medication, for any of you who really like taking pills, for people who have had transplanted organs. And the organs live longer. Whether or not the owner of those organs lives longer is not clear at this point. It's called sirolimus or rapamycin. If you pay me large amounts of money, I might give you a prescription for it. Now, as you know, I'm a doctor, and one of the questions that comes up is, what's the point of doctors in all of this? Isn't there something that we can do from a medical point of view? And I have to say that if you look at what's happened in medicine over the past, well, it's quite a while. When I first came here, I'm a flatlander by birth and by trade. I used to think in terms like hours, weeks, months, years. And so when I would ask someone, well, how long has this been going on, who lived up here, they would say, well, not too long. Or they might say, well, long time. And I learned pretty quickly that not too long might be 2 or 3 minutes, or it might be 10 or 15 years. A long time might be 10 minutes. I mean, how long does it take a watch pot to boil? Or it might be 30 or 40 years. So let's just say that it was a long time ago that medicine, if you went to see a doctor, it was unlikely that you would escape better off than you are now. And in fact, if you read any of the stories about hospitals and doctors, even as early in the early 20th century, you would see that it was a pretty horrific thing. We had basically one medication that we knew how to use that did good, and that was morphine. And we gave it to everybody all the time. Until 1914, you didn't even have to see a doctor for it. And everything else was treated with castor oil, or if it was a bad case, strychnine. Well, that's changed a lot. You can think about the fact that when I first started practice, not too long ago, if you came in to see me with a heart attack, I would give you morphine and hope that you didn't die. Now that's changed tremendously. Our ability to treat and cure cancer has changed tremendously. We can replace pretty much any body part that you can think of for only a fraction of your mortgage or pension. And so medicine really has made tremendous strides. Unfortunately, the strides that we've made have been primarily in treating diseases. And as many of you know, either through, probably not through personal experience, but through your families, that life, in fact, is a zero-sum game. So if you prevent heart disease, if you prevent strokes, if you prevent cancer, if you do all those things because you've lived a healthy life and because you've gone to see your doctor on a regular basis who keeps looking for these things that we can treat, you'll live to be a ripe old age. And you'll live until you get the only disease that's left when you've treated all the other diseases. It's the one where you, well, if you, when you're trying to think about something that you, and before, it's, Helen, what is it? Joyce? No. Tim, you must. Well, there's this disease you get. Colleen, you must remember what it is. No, it begins with an A, I know that much. But anyway, it's a disease you don't want to have. I know. Okay, she knows. She knows. Okay. And that's been the problem with what we've done so far. So that when you think about the fact that physicians, we should be pretty pleased with ourselves because of what we've been able to accomplish with eradicating diseases or controlling diseases, that actually isn't the case, probably because we haven't done as much as we could for making people feel better. In fact, everywhere I go, I see my colleagues who are getting more and more dissatisfied with our line of work, even though what we can do seems to be so much better. In fact, this is going to seem strange to you, but it's gotten so bad that there was a colleague of mine, didn't practice in this area, further upstate, who was in a perfectly good primary care practice with his wife, and I'm not saying that has anything to do with it. But he gave up the whole thing to become, of all things, a governor. No, I'm not making this up. If that wasn't bad enough, he decided he wanted to be president. And what he said was, it's no fun being a doctor anymore. Now, I don't know about fun. I do know that we get paid large amounts of money, and whether or not you're supposed to have fun doing that is perhaps a separate question. But this is what I do know, that no matter how difficult it gets to be a doctor, you only have two choices in this life. You can either be a healthcare provider or you can be a healthcare receiver. And there's no question about which one is always better. But one of the reasons, we talk in the profession a lot about what it is that's made medicine so unsatisfying. I think, as I mentioned, that a lot of it is because we haven't done enough to make people feel better. Usually it's things like malpractice and insurance, paperwork, public radio. Does anybody ever listen to public radio here? How many people listen to it? You know what the problem is with public radio? Is they don't have commercials. I mean, except during those 3-month periods when they're fundraising. So what happened, now they talk real slow. Used to be this guy, Robert Lurtzum, on public radio, who talked real slow, so he could fill up the time waiting for when the commercial didn't appear. But even with that, there's not enough time to get through the day, so what they do is they have these news programs, and they go on for hours on end. I mean, you know, it's basically there's two things that happen in the world, right? Either somebody gets killed, or a bunch of people are having a meeting going blah, 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 blah. And a responsible radio station covers that in about 5 minutes. But you listen to, let's say, Too Much Considered. Anybody ever listen to that? They go on and on and on and on. Well, one of the things that happens is when they don't have enough to do is they start reading medical journals. Now, I try and keep up. I read the Inquirer. I read Newsweek. I even have patients who call me and tell me, hey, did you know this is going on? But I have to work for a living, so I can't necessarily be out there listening to all the stuff that's going on. So it often happens that somebody comes into the office and says, you know that pill you gave me, it turns out that it causes cancer. And of course, I don't know, this is somebody like Linda Wertheimer, or one of these people has just told her on the radio that it causes cancer. I don't know about it, it makes me look bad. And that has been a big problem for our sense of self-esteem. Doctors, as you know, are very sensitive people. You know, and even an ordinary amount of criticism can just put off our feet. Imagine you're coming in to see me for some reason, and immediately preceding that has been a patient who's given me a hard time about the fact that I don't know what I'm doing, and I gave the wrong pills, and besides, I was late. Is that going to put me in a good mood to be the best healer I can? No, it isn't. But patients don't realize that anymore, and that has been a source of friction. Now, the reason for this, if I could give a quote, comes from, I think can best be described by a character in Charles Dickens by the name of Mr. Micawber. Anybody know Mr. Micawber? Mr. Micawber was eternally in debt. He always had prospects that were supposed to be improving just around the corner. He couldn't manage his funds. He couldn't manage his family. Everything was a mess. So he's giving advice. This isn't David Copperfield. He's giving advice to David Copperfield. And he says, my other piece of advice, Copperfield, you know, annual income £20, annual expenditure 1996, result, happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20, ought and 6, result, misery. The principle being that if you spend a little bit less than your income, you'll be happy. And if you spend a little bit more than your income, you'll be unhappy. Now, this is certainly good financial advice, which nobody pays attention to. But it's not only financial advice. If I could make one other reference to Dickens, unplug it. If I could make one other reference to Dickens, he has a character named Pip in a novel called Great Expectations. People know that? Pip he's born, he thinks he's the son of a poor blacksmith. He's raised in poverty, and he's perfectly content. And then Miss Havisham makes him think that he has great expectations, and he becomes miserable. He doesn't trust anybody, he doesn't trust himself, and he spends the rest of his life being very unhappy. I have 3 kids. 2 of them are daughters, and 1 is a son. Have any of you known who've had daughters and sons that they are different? My daughters are what you might call accomplished. They've raised families. They work very hard as teachers. And they have a strong sense of social justice and fairness and spend a considerable period of time solving the world's problems, usually between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., so as not to interfere with the rest of the family affairs. By ordinary criteria, they would be considered successful. My son, on a busy day, you would call laid back. No matter how much my daughters accomplish, they expect to accomplish more. The result? Misery. My son, no matter how little he accomplishes, he expects to accomplish less. Result? Happiness. So one of the things to remember is that the key to life is low expectations. And that's not one of the two secrets. But if you can't get the low expectations part, the secrets I'm going to give you won't do any good. So you have a few minutes to work on that. It used to be that patients were like this. You know, when I first came here, which was a while ago, if a patient got out of the office without serious bodily harm, the patient was satisfied. And patients knew that in the interaction between the doctor and the patient, it was the patient's job to get better, and it was the doctor's job to get the credit. Because it was important for your doctor to feel good. The patients knew this. They didn't want to put you off your feed by presenting with a problem, let's say, that you didn't have a clue what to do with. So they would come in, and I would say, "What's the problem?" And they would say, "That's what I came here to find out." Well, yeah, you laugh, but that's exactly the kind of answer that I want to hear. It gives me a lot of flexibility. If I feel that I'm up on my cardiac problems that day, I say, "Well, a little chest pain? Well, yeah, maybe a while ago. All right, we're off and running." Or maybe there's, but now what happens, you come in, and they've got a list. Some of you have even brought in lists. I've seen them. There's nothing worse than a list. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to start screening for these. And you start going through the list. And you expect that I'm going to do something about every item on the list. And not only am I going to do something, but it's something that's going to make you better. And you want me to be on time. I should mention something about that just for a second. One of the things to remember, this is a true story. Some years ago, there was a fellow came into my office. I can give his name because he gave me permission before he died, named Jim Nowlin. He had an appointment to see me. It was around 2 o'clock. And so around 2:45, I was finishing up my tea. And Betty French says to me, "I think you better see Mr. Nowlin now." I said, "Now? It's only 2:45. She said, "Well, he's having a slight problem." So I went out in the waiting room, and there he was, lying on the floor. And he was without the usual accoutrements that patients bring to the hospital, namely a pulse and a blood pressure. So we put the paddles on him and did the usual stuff, and he jumped back up again and went off the ICU and was fine. Now, if I had seen him on time and sent him on his way at 2:30, when he had that episode, he would have been somewhere else. Thank you. The safest place to be is in your doctor's office. How did I get on that? Oh, we're talking about expectations. Because patients knew that. They didn't expect, "Oh, that's okay. You've got other things to do, Dr. Conger. Don't hurry." And the other thing is, imagine this. Doesn't happen so much around here. Suppose you're going off to some other place. You're going to Plainfield, let's say. No, there's no doctor's office there. You're going to Kansas. And you get to Kansas, and you're staying in a place there, and you wake up in the morning, and you've got this terrible pain in your chest. And you try and ignore it because you're far from home. I think it'll go away, but it doesn't go away. And pretty soon, it's obvious you've either got incurable cancer or a terrible heart attack. Something awful's going on. So you rush into the doctor's office, the nearest doctor's office. You walk in, and there's a nurse standing there. The nurse says, "The doctor will see you now." Takes you right in to the waiting room, and there's a doctor standing there waiting to see you. This is a hypothetical situation, okay? And so you tell the doctor the problem. Doctor listens carefully, does an examination, maybe takes an echocardiogram and says, "It's okay, it's just some gas." And at that point, your only sensation should be one of immediate relief. There's nothing like a narrow escape from death to make you feel better. It's like when, you know, the airplane is bumping, 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 and you finally land. But instead, something isn't right. And you're thinking about it, and you're thinking about it, and you go back out and you go home. And then you realize, when you came into that office, where were all those other patients waiting to see this doctor without whom they couldn't do? They were somewhere else. So the other thing is that a full waiting room helps to engender a sense of confidence, or a full hall, let's say, that your doctor knows what she is doing. So these are important things to keep in mind. I mention this as part of the fact that what happens when expectations get too high. I learned this myself the other day. I had to have a physical. Now, you know, we tend to avoid medical care as much as possible in my line of work, at least on the principle that it's better to give than to receive. So I go in, and she examines me and says, "Your blood pressure is too high." I said, "What do you mean my blood pressure is too high? I feel fine. I run all the time. I don't eat any salt. I have a healthy diet." She says, "Too high." I said, "No, it can't be. Take it again." "It's still too high." And I said, "But I feel fine." She says, "That's why we call it the silent killer." So I know pretty well. I said, "What am I going to do?" She said, "Got to take a pill." So I said, "All right." So I take the pill. You know, I'm giving these pills out. Makes you tired. Makes you depressed. Makes you so that you can't. Well, it does a lot of things that you don't want it to do. And it doesn't do anything that you want. You don't feel better taking the pill. I felt fine before. And I come back, and she says, "Oh, your blood pressure is much better. But it's not quite where we want it. We're going to give you another pill." I hope none of you have ever been to me when I've said we're going to give you another pill and you felt fine before we started. Well, you know, as I get old, as I get more experienced, I realize that one of the problems is that we do too much to people and not enough for them. That's perhaps a lot of what's behind the holistic movement, the natural movement, the idea that maybe there's some point in your life when we should be making people feel better instead of just treating diseases. And this kind of brought it home to me. So I've changed my approach to things, and I want to tell you about it by telling you a story. Those of you who... You know, I have to say one thing. I thought when I was asked to come to speak here, my first thought, and I'm a doctor, I'm fairly vain, and I thought, well, what an honor. And then I realized, he asked me to come and speak at 1:30 in the afternoon. Now, most doctors who have a thriving practice are doing what at 1:30 in the afternoon? They're seeing patients. So Marie figures, Conger, he's an old fart. We can bring him. Nobody will miss him. The other thing, as I noticed with Joyce, is that 1:30 in the afternoon is when you usually do what? Take a nap. Now, I should mention that that's one of the other, the business about aging. This is also not one of the two secrets. But to nap or not to nap, that is the question. And in fact, there's considerable dispute upon this subject. And it depends upon who you are. If you are a Greek or a Spanish male, anybody here Greek or Spanish? And you take a siesta every day, it reduces substantially your risk of having a heart attack. If you are a woman, you die sooner. Now, this is on the premise, I assume, that women and men, as with daughters and sons, are different. And that women who are basically responsible for taking care of the world have to be doing something all the time or they're going to be in trouble. Whereas we men are pretty good at taking a nap. So I will say that it turns out that for those of us who need to take naps, who are of the male persuasion, it's fine, as long as we have a woman to look over us while we're doing it. But I want to tell you, I told you I was going to tell you a story, and attached to the story are the two secrets that you all been waiting for. It's been a long time, I know, but we're almost there. Many years ago, there was a woman who lived in a town in the south of France. She lived in one of those lovely 15th or 16th century cottages, and it was a very well-kept house and was the admiration of everybody in the town. She also, I should mention, this was the same town in which Vincent van Gogh lived, and she was well acquainted with him. And until this other thing happened, that was probably the reason she was best known, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. At any rate, her next-door neighbor was an attorney named Thierry, and he coveted her house. Her name was Jean-Louise Calment. And he said, "I would like to buy your house." And she said, not unreasonably, "But I am living in it." He says, "Well, yes, I know." He says, "But I would still like to buy it." This is the excerpt from the fishes, but I did not throw fishes. I don't think. Did I throw fishes? So he said, "I know, but I will make you a deal. And this is the deal. I will pay you 500 francs a month until you die. And then I will have the house." Now, this woman had no children. She had a sister who lived in Paris who had absolutely no interest in the house. So she thought, why not? Seemed like a good deal. 500 francs a month. He could have the house when she died. She had no use for it. She was 82 at the time. He was 40. And he figured, well, you know, she's in pretty good health, but who knows how long she's going to live. I'm in 40, I'm in pretty good health. I should have at least quite a few years to enjoy the house. And in fact, he lived 41 years to the ripe old age of 81. Jean-Louise lived 42 years. To the exceedingly ripe age of 122 years, 3 months and some odd days, and in fact, to this day, is the longest-lived person in recorded history. Her nearest competitor is somebody in Georgia, I think, who was only 119, so her record is safe at least for a while. Well, needless to say, they asked her about it. She says, well, she says, sometimes in life you make bad decisions. But because she had lived for so long, there was a tremendous amount of interest, as you would all be. Here she is, living healthy and happy at 110, 115, even up to 120. Well, she drank red wine every day. She cooked with olive oil. She did all the usual things. She went for a walk. Did she smoke? Oh, no, I do not smoke. Now, you know, French like their Gauloise, those cigarettes. Did you never smoke? Well, I used to smoke, but I gave it up. When did you give it up? Oh, when I was 100, I think. She could not hold these cigarettes. So one piece of advice, not the official advice, is if you're going to smoke, smoke until you're 100. Okay? And they said, well, but there must be something else for the reason that you live so long. Some philosophy of life that you could. She says, well, she says, in philosophy, you ask Camus. He said, he's dead. Oh. Ask Sartre. Well, he's dead too. Ah, see. She says, I'm not a philosopher. And she said, but perhaps there are two things. Here we go. Wake up, everybody. Okay. Two things. And one is very easy, and one is very hard. Yeah. The hard one, she didn't worry about anything that she couldn't change. And the other one, she had chocolate every day. You pass those around? Now, people often ask me, well, is it dark chocolate or milk chocolate? Well, just remember that if you're going to eat milk chocolate, you have to eat twice as much. Small price to pay for eternal health and happiness. Now, there actually is, at the risk of being scientific here, there actually is some scientific information to justify this. These compounds that are so-called antioxidants or phenols or procyanidins are the substances that are supposed to prevent our cells from breaking down so that we can keep knitting forever without getting our hands too stiff. And of all of the substances, if you look at it on a weight basis, cocoa, chocolate, has by far the highest of any other substance. In fact, if you do it, there's been several studies now, you know, there's a lot of interest in all these kinds of things. If you give people chocolate, as opposed to white chocolate, which has nothing to do with chocolate as far as I'm concerned and should be banned. Ever tried it? It's vile stuff. It's just sugar and caramel, I think. Anyway, if you give people either chocolate or white chocolate, and you look at their blood pressure goes down. Goes down quite a bit. In fact, not only that, but if a person has diabetes and you give them cocoa powder, the blood sugar goes down. Now, anyone ever tried unsweetened chocolate? It's a little tricky. But the cocoa itself lowers the blood sugar, lowers insulin. And in several studies that have been done of Dutch men who drink a lot of cocoa, they found that the more cocoa you drink, the fewer heart attacks you have. So there's plenty of scientific evidence that chocolate is good for you in addition to tasting good. You're starting to feel younger. I've discovered one of the things I tried the other day when I was particularly lady by my standards was I gave people chocolate before I talked to them. It works pretty well. You know, I got it from the hotels where they put them under the pillows. I don't know if that's for blood pressure purposes or what it's for, but that's... Now, some people have said to me, well, what if I can't take chocolate? What if I'm allergic to chocolate? What do I do then? And in that case, the only thing I can say, don't worry about it. Thank you. Marie said I would answer questions. I should just remind you that since none of you are paying me, the quality of the answer will be proportionate. Anybody have any questions? Helen.
Besides your grandmother, your parents influenced your growing up years?
You mean the way my grandmother did? They never took me to see a butcher. Oh, I'm sorry. Helen wanted to know if, beside my grandmother, did my parents influence my growing up years. All I can remember is being terrified of my grandmother. I don't remember being terrified of my parents. Well, has anybody here written a book? One of the things that what is my next book about? One of the things that people who write do not like to discuss is the whole concept of about. You know, if I tell you what it's about, you don't even have to buy it. You can just say, oh, it's about. What it's about, though, is everything you need to know to live a long and healthy life. Okay? I should mention that everything in the book is true. It's only the facts that I've had to alter. And I had to alter them quite a bit. What happened was, same thing happened when I wrote Bag Balm and Duct Tape. My wife, who's an attorney, and said, you know, there's a line you have to be careful where you cross over from, you know, telling something that's too much about someone to telling something that's clearly not about them. And as an attorney, she can draw a very fine line. So she said, well, if you use actual names, you can't do that. You're going to be in trouble. And even if you use different names, but you describe a situation that is clearly one person, that's not right either. So all of the names and all of the events are fictitious. But other than that, it's completely true. How many pages? You should be able to finish it before you die. There's a lot of things that we keep secret. One is how many pages in a book. But I tell you this, when you buy it, you'll be able to open it up, turn to the last page, and see.
You said it was everything you knew.
Did I say that? No, everything you need to know, Joyce, not everything I know.
Have you got your seeds started yet?
Yes. I even have my artichoke started.
Good.
Yes. I'm sorry, have I got my seeds started yet? We're now getting down to the important stuff. This is why, you know, she asked me to come at 1:30. She doesn't care about this stuff about aging.
Stay young.
Oh, yeah. Is there an advantage to living here as opposed to living to places where people use clocks? There's always an advantage to living where you are. I didn't even have to go to medical school for that one. So we've handled clocks and seeds. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Would somebody please give him some more chocolate? That's one of the, you know, in the category of don't worry about things that you can't understand or know something about, that's right up the top there. Any sentence that begins with why, I don't answer. Yes, sir. Ah, okay. He has an answer to the question. Ah. Well, if you write down your name and give it to Marie, she will give you a free book. And I'd be willing to sell her at cost as many as she needs. Don't. I have sun gold. I have black cherry. I have Roma. And I have one of these hybrid miscegenated things that I can't remember the name of. Half of them are for me and half of them are for Nadia.
How do you keep your tomatoes from getting that blight?
What blight?
Happens with my tomatoes.
We don't have blight. No. If you eat them before they turn red, you don't have to worry about the blight. Grow what? I stick with. She says a tomato called Health Kit has more something in it, but it doesn't have more than chocolate. It doesn't have near. Now, chocolate-covered tomatoes. There you got something.